The New York Knicks are on the verge of acquiring Karl-Anthony Towns for the Timberwolves. So what does this mean for the Heat? We break down the deal and if Miami's forced to react with a move. Plus, Kel'el speaks about his role with Miami on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and the best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app. Hit that subscribe button. On YouTube, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Before we get to some of the fallout about Julius Randle and the Heat's involvement in that whole thing, David, now that our Media Day interviews are posted, I wanted to see what you took away from these conversations because we haven't gotten a chance to talk about them yet. In case people missed it, we had exclusive sit-down interviews from Media Day with Duncan Robinson, Nikola Jovic, Josh Christopher, Nasir Little, Pelle Larsson, and Kel'el. Those are all available on YouTube and in your podcast feeds. But David, I'll tell you what stood out to me about Nico. There's two things there. First of all, he seemed bigger just sitting next to him. I don't know if you kind of felt that, but like he just seemed bigger, stronger sitting next to him. And then what we talked about in terms of him being more physical, you and I were talking about this before we started recording here, how like, yeah, this whole idea of him going into the low post and all this stuff was way overblown. And we asked him that, and he actually kind of had a chance to clarify it. Like, yeah, no, I'm not going to be like a low post player. I'm not going to be posting up like Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. That's not really the vision here. Here's actually what Nico said to us.
In terms of like being that more physical kind of player, being a little bit more, is that just sort of generally what you're trying to work on in your game in terms of, yeah, maybe posting up smaller players, but the physicality of everything?
Yeah.
As you continue to get bigger and stronger and all those things?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I meant. You know, sometimes I'm lost in my words, but I just want to be more physical and use my body more because I feel like I can, make so many opportunities for me and others with just being more locked in and more physical, where I can get to the rim easily. So I know I'll be a good spot shooter, and I'm still working on even being a better. But I always trying to add something that I don't do, and I wasn't really doing a lot around the basket, which I think I should, especially because I'm 6'10", and I feel I can use it a lot more.
So, Nikola Jovic talking about just being more physical, rebounding. Yeah, a little bit of post-up stuff, being more active around the basket. What did you think about what he had to say there?
I think it kind of goes in hand with something else that he mentioned, was just that now entering year 3, there's a level of confidence there that he did not have, like an understanding of what his role is going to be, what's required of him. It's no more the deer caught in the headlights as the young European teenager tries to make his way onto an NBA roster. Like, he started games. He had the experience of the NBA playoffs and playing significant minutes in those times. And then combined with, as you said, the physicality and the improved physicality, I think it bodes really well for him, that he's just more determined to make an impact using all these different aspects and tying them all together in a way that makes him a more impactful player in a way that's different from what we saw last year. So I'm curious to see how it pans out, because it would, I think, unlock another side to him where he's maximizing that size and able to capitalize when he's being guarded against by smaller players, and be able to use his touch and skill around the basket in order to contribute more on offense too. So we've talked about this a lot more consistently, I think, now that we've got a clear picture of what this roster is going to look like the addition of Terry Rozier, what we can expect from Tyler if he does wind up playing more off ball, the evolution of these young players, Kel'el, et cetera. Like, there's just added elements to it, and you can make this offense much more versatile than it's been in the past. And hearing Eric Spoelstra speak exactly on that yesterday at Media Day, again, I think there's a clear understanding. We've got to find a way to juice this offense. We've got to find a way to score more easily and not have to have these games in the mud, as much as they might be fun. And I don't know if it's actually going to translate or not, but I think it does it does seem like a good
Mhm.
sign that everybody seems to have an understanding, and that you have these players that are all adding different elements of their game so that they can contribute to a more fluid offense than what we've seen over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, it's like Spo always says, you just want more menu options on the menu.
Right.
And if
Right.
Nikola Jovic has a little bit more things that he can do offensively other than just being a spot-up shooter, those are more options on the menu. But to go back to Nico here for a second, I'm reminded and kind of listening to this about a little bit of friction last year with Nikola Jovic and the coaching staff when they were asking him, hey, like, go to the G League, play center for us. And him telling
Right.
people, like, I'm not a center. I'm not a low post player. This is not my game. I'm more of a wing. That's just kind of how my game is. And again, there was some tension there, I think, between Nikola Jovic and the coaching staff that they all worked through. And eventually Nikola Jovic became a better player from it. But him taking a very different tone in terms of talking about being a more physical player and just being around the basket more. The exact thing that he was talking about, like that he was brushing up against last year, he's talking about embracing it, going out of his way to work on that stuff and saying, like, I want to add something to my game every year. This is what I want to add, right? Like, it couldn't be more different than how he was talking about those kinds of responsibilities last year, the way that he's talking about it this year. And so I find that very encouraging, surprising, whatever word. But it also speaks to the fact that you could call Nikola Jovic whatever you want in terms of his position. The Heat
Sure.
view him as somebody who is 6'10", and he's going to have to play that way sometimes. Not all the time, because you want to embrace the other things that make him special: the three-point shooting, handling the ball, passing, spacing the
Transition,
floor,
yeah.
pushing the pace, all this stuff. But he still has to act like a 6'10" player if he's going to be in that front court, which obviously the Heat view him there. But speaking of the front court, we also got a chance to sit down with Kel'el Ware at Media Day. Here's what he had to say. This was my big takeaway, at least from that conversation.
As basically the lone 7-footer on this roster, day one, like, what's the thing? Like, I could do this right now.
A rebound defend. I mean, that's something that I was gifted with, and so just been able to rebound defend, run the court, set picks and roll. I mean, I'm gonna get open off, just setting picks alone, so and running the floor. So
How much of that did you learn in summer league from the coaching staff there, and finding, like, okay, like, if I just set the screens and roll to the basket, your production spoke for itself in the success.
No, most definitely. Because that's what they told me to do all the time. They want to see rim runs. They want to see me rebounding the ball, me blocking shots, and so that's what I feel like I was doing. So
I didn't hear three-point shooting in there, David.
No. And again, tying kind of together with what Nico said. You know what? You've got size on this roster. If you're one of the taller players in this roster, and Nico and Kel'el certainly are that, get to the rim, make an impact there, because that's certainly going to translate. You're going to have the opportunity. So it's about finding the right combination of players that can space the floor, whether that's Bam Adebayo or Tyler Hero or whomever. Like, we have to see different combinations and lineups where they can space the floor and allow these guys that have this size to take advantage of that, because that's been a dimension that's been missing from the offense. And with Ware, legitimate 7-foot size, the athleticism, and just, I mean, he can't get a better combination than a young player at that size with the ability to make an impact about the rim. And he has those tools. And so I, again, am very curious to see how they kind of find a fit for Kel'el. But all the expectation was, he could be, playing alongside Bam. He could be the guy that spaces the floor a little bit if Bam is still stuck in the mid-range game. I don't think that's the expectation at all. I think we'll see added three-point shooting from Bam, but I think when Ware's in the game, it's going to be kind of just pounding it into the paint and finding a way, having him dive to the rim, get those good opportunities there, because that's where the defenses break down, and we'll see that. There'll be a lot more off-ball movement, a lot more backdoor cuts, things of that sort, where you're all of a sudden going to have somebody kind of slip a screen there. And maybe I'd see a lot of ghost screens, a lot of slip screens where he's just going to be able to just dive to the rim, and it's about finding that right playmaker to kind of get that ball to him. But even then, it's like, I don't know how much playmaking actually needs to get done.
Because he's huge.
Or something. Yeah, because he's so big. Exactly.
He's huge.
Not just toss it up there and let him catch
his job is just be a big target with this enormous catch radius, this Calvin Johnson catch radius, right? Like, that's the idea there. Kel'el Ware, in how dated is that? When did Calvin Johnson retire? Is that bad?
It's DK Metcalf. How about that?
Yeah, you know what? Hopefully he could be a little bit more productive than DK Metcalf, who just feels like he's a little disappointing in Seattle. He goes in four directions, Kel'el Ware. He gets to go in four directions. North, south, and up and down. That's it. That's it. None of the side to side, none of that like baby LaMarcus Aldridge stuff that I talked about when we were doing our scouting report on him, which is what he did
Right.
the first summer league game. In the first summer league game in San Francisco, it was just a lot of bad LaMarcus Aldridge impressions. And immediately, literally overnight in game 2, all of that stuff was erased from the game. And you could tell the coaching staff pulled him aside and was just like, no, north, south, up and down. That's what you're doing in the offense right now. And then sitting down with him at media day and speaking with him, you know, he helps power the Heat summer league championship run and all these things. I mean, he was such a huge force in all of that. He's, you know, people are already talking about him the way we were talking about Jaime last year, that maybe is he the steal of the draft again by the Heat 2 years in a row. All these things, one of the most impressive rookies of summer league, all these things.
Bigger. He looks bigger too, doesn't he? Like he's put on some weight since
a little bit, yeah.
Summer. Okay.
A little bit. And so all that stuff is going to help him, I think, do the thing that he needs to do day one. And then later on in that conversation, he does talk about what else Heat fans could expect from him later on in his career. But for now, I think he's got a very clear vision of what it is that he's going to be asked to do and what he should be doing at the NBA level. And I think that's a home run for the Heat. The fact that he got all of that right away and embraced that and saw some of the dividends from it.
Did you get the sense that maybe he embraces that kind of physicality? Because I think some of the knocks was maybe he's quote unquote soft or maybe kind of tends to shy away from that sort of contact.
You know what's great about being 7 foot?
Right.
It's not that physical when you're just soaring above everybody else, you know? Like it could still, it doesn't have to be that visible. But to your point though, yeah, I think he does. I think he's like, he basically said, I got these God-given gifts where I'm just huge and athletic and strong. And you're just like, yeah, dude, do that. Use that, you know? So,
Really,
of course, everybody
can. Part of that preseason matchup against Victor Wembanyama too. They have to share the floor.
It's gonna be so much fun. Right? That's gonna be so. Oh yeah, they have to. Eric Spoelstra and Greg Popovich should agree to just make that happen beforehand. But
start Kel'el for one game at least in the preseason. Yeah, why not?
Yeah. All right, so you can see the full Nikola Jovic interview, the full Kel'el Ware interview. And everybody else that we spoke to from Media Day. It's up in the podcast feed. It's also up on YouTube if you want to watch it over there. But we're going to go ahead and move on. Did the Heat have a chance to get in on Karl-Anthony Towns and that whole trade? And what does it mean that they called the Knicks about Julius Randle? We're going to carve into all of that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. So Tuesday afternoon, we're recording this, and the sting of that fantastic game from the Dolphins still hasn't worn off yet.
The Dolphins game.
That's right. That's a good attitude. It never took place. It never happened. This season has never existed and never will exist. And it just doesn't matter what happens over the next 13.
Good news. It was announced right before we started recording that Tyler Huntley will start again at quarterback for the Dolphins in their next game. So
they don't have any choice. They don't have
Ryan Tannehill's a free agent. That's all I'm saying.
Are you at that point now where you think Tannehill's an option? Because I
was at that point in the first quarter of Monday Night Football when I started Googling, is Ryan Tannehill still a free agent? So, yes, yep. I am there.
All right. Hey, if you're an NFL fan, aside from any Dolphins fans that are still lingering, you can start the season with a big return over at FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook for so many reasons. It's like, sometimes in the middle of last night's game, you get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out all the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So you'll get started with a $200 bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Go over right now to FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. Something exciting here. I'd like to invite you to the exclusive Locked On Heat Insider Community. That's right. If you want to join, there's a link in the show notes on YouTube and in the podcast description. If you join, you're going to get a lot of cool stuff. Exclusive content, insider information from me and David's reporting on the ground, game notes and stats while we cover the games live, intel on moves and trades that could happen before the trade deadline, and best of all, the chance to talk with us one-on-one through the subtext messaging platform. So this is the best way to be a Locked On Heat lifer. If you want to join, you could sign up with the link in the show notes. It's free for 14 days. After that, it's $4.99 a month. You can cancel at any time, no worries. But we're really excited for this chance to connect with you all. Again, link in the show notes and in the description.
So great. Our watch party last year kind of just showed how much of a community that we've been able to fortunately build. and just another dimension to it. Again, we're talking about the versatility of Miami's offense. Well, there's a versatility to the Locked On Network too, and now our community of listeners that has grown so much over the last few years, and now another way for us to reach them with exclusive information that they won't be able to get on this podcast or anywhere else. So it's just a great opportunity to connect with us and to be able to chat about your favorite team. You wouldn't be here otherwise. So here's the opportunity you've been looking for.
Yeah, and we'll be able to provide like different kinds of content on that platform too. We'll have like mailbags and stuff like that, things that we could post on YouTube that you'll only have access to if we give you a code on the Subtext platform, on that Locked On Heat Insider platform. I also have this Tyler Hero take that I've been workshopping that I'm not yet ready to spin on the Locked On Heat platform just yet. I feel like it might be a little too hot for us here. But maybe I can workshop it with our friends over on the Locked On Heat Insider Subtext.
Nice.
That's a place to do it. All right, so it's been a few days. We haven't had a chance to talk about this Karl-Anthony Towns trade, David, with Media Day and everything that was going on. In case you don't know, for those who are living under a rock, the Knicks traded Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo and a first-round pick from the Pistons to Minnesota for Karl-Anthony Towns on Friday night. Not officially, but those are the right. Good point. That's sort of the skeleton of the offer of the deal of the package. There's other moving parts, different contracts that got to move around. Charlotte's involved as a third team somehow. And shortly after that news broke on Friday night, Ian Begley, who covers the Knicks, tweeted that the Heat, in addition to the Charlotte Hornets, who I guess got involved as this third team, that the Heat were among some of the teams that called about Julius Randle. So there's a bunch of stuff to get to here. But what did you make of that report and the Heat being mentioned there?
Yeah, curiously, it just, there's if you're looking at the starting lineup, and Spo certainly gave us a hint at Media Day, 4 players already penciled in, and just one spot open, and that's probably the 4th spot. And so it kind of makes sense that they're looking for something a different dimension. And Randle, an all-star level talent, certainly has his weaknesses in his game, but a guy who's not afraid of putting up shots, can generate offense on his own, can pace the floor, can attack the paint. A little injury prone throughout his career, but for the most part, has been a pretty reliable player during the regular season. I know the postseason has been a completely different issue, but he's a really good player. I think I'm still higher on Julius Randle than the average NBA fan because 1, he plays for New York, and 2, he struggled in the playoffs. You were a longtime realtor over on Julius Randle Island. I'm not sure if you're still hanging on to that piece of real estate there, but I think we've always appreciated his versatility and his skill set, and the fact that Miami was looking to acquire that. I don't know how that would have potentially gone down. I don't know what the particulars would have been. I don't know who they would have been able to move, and I don't know if it would have helped Miami's roster considerably, which is why I think a deal wasn't consummated. But at the same time, interesting that Miami would think, you know what? We can add more size to our roster. We can add a very good scoring player. And at the same time, kind of look, if you acquire him, and the deal with Randle is that, well, he becomes a free agent at the end of this season, right? Potentially. And if that's the case, and let's say something doesn't get done with Jimmy Butler either, that's a heck of a way to clear a lot of salary cap space for next offseason.
So he's making $29 million this year. He's got a player option for about the same amount next year. The idea, very similar to Jimmy Butler, is that he's going to opt out of that and try to get another long-term contract. Now, you don't say no to $30 million until you say no to $30 million. So we don't know really what's going to happen with Julius Randle. I like his game. I think he's an underrated playmaker. He's got the ability to score. He's a 33% career three-point shooter, which I don't love in terms of spacing, but and his playoff record is abysmal. Like the production is just flatly bad. But yeah, I mean, it was a little interesting to see the Heat come up in that report. Now, I don't know to what extent of, hey, we'll help you facilitate this trade, and maybe there's something that we can get out of this that's not Julius Randle. Maybe there's a pick or some contract that we can offload or whatever the motivation might have been for Miami. We don't know for sure that they were calling in regards to trading for Julius Randle, that we just know that they were involved in maybe some of these calls, and maybe they would have just been the third team like Charlotte is. Who knows? But I think it's fair when Heat fans say, well, listen, like Karl-Anthony Towns, who is sort of like a perfect, we've talked about Karl-Anthony Towns among many potential players who could be the next star that the Heat trade for as a potential fit on the Heat's roster. knockdown three, like one of the best 3-point shooters in the league, not just for a big man, but just for all the players in the league. The guy's a knockdown 3-point shooter, 7 feet tall, a decent rebounder, definitely has his warts. His playoff warts aren't as big as Julius Randle's playoff warts, but he's got them. They're there. Defensively, there's stuff that you don't love, but if he's bracketed by Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, then you can have a very similar situation to Minnesota where he was actually kind of a plus. He was almost a value add defensively when he was playing with Rudy Gobert and Jay McDaniels because he was just able to be 7 feet tall as sort of a weak side help defender. And like he's not a 5, we know that, but he wouldn't have to be in Miami just the way he didn't have to be in Minnesota. We'll see what happens in New York. But that's the part that I think is fair to question. It's like, okay, well, Karl-Anthony Towns is this all-NBA player, and the Knicks got him for basically what we could call a Julius Randle expiring contract. Dante DiVincenzo, who's a good player, but he's not an all-NBA caliber guy, and not an all-star guy, and a first-round pick with some pretty decent protections on it. That's all it cost. And I saw this basically in the immediate aftermath of Friday night. I have all of NBA Twitter blowing up about Karl-Anthony Towns. I got separate South Florida sports Twitter blowing up about that crazy game ending to the Hurricanes football game. And then I've got Heat Twitter blowing up about, like, why couldn't we trade for Cat if this is all it cost? And I think that's a decent question, and I think we'll explore that in the next segment here on Locked On Heat. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. Best way to support the show. Leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app. Hit subscribe right now on YouTube. In terms of why the Heat couldn't trade for Karl-Anthony Towns, I think it's maybe a lower price than I would have anticipated Cat getting traded for. I still don't think the Heat could have met it. What did you think?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think for Minnesota, this is the reality of living in a new salary cap world, and how that the second apron concerns are looming for that team in particular, and the idea of, you know what, we've got to make some adjustments. They're fully invested in Rudy Gobert and keeping him on that roster. They're fully invested in Ant and all the other players that they have surrounding those two. That's the core of their team. Anthony Towns was not. So it's interesting that I think they kind of reset a little bit, and obviously trading Karl-Anthony Towns, but you get a player who might be a good fit alongside Gobert there. I think a guy like Randle, who can play the 4 spot, can slide up to play the 5 a little bit, a big body. You know, he's a guy who kind of fits in there and can provide some good offense, score at a high level, etc. So it's not necessarily a step back, you know, for Minnesota. I think you can kind of Towns is obviously the better player, but acquiring Randle doesn't set them as far back. And if you look at what Miami has to offer, they just don't have the players on their roster that would entice Minnesota to make this trade for Towns. And they would have to take a significant step back, much further than they did by acquiring Randle, at least in my opinion.
It wouldn't have accomplished anything that they set out to accomplish, right? You don't trade Karl-Anthony Towns because you didn't want Karl-Anthony Towns. I think that was a very hard trade for Tim Connolly and that organization to make, but they knew, like you already mentioned, there's a sobering reality that comes with this new salary cap structure and how expensive this team was going to be. I was a little surprised that they decided to do this trade. Like, the timing of it was a little weird. They kind of had another year, days before media day, and also just like they could have done this for another year. It still would have been expensive, but they could have been this expensive for another year before it got really, really expensive next year. So they could have played a whole season, which is, I think, what most people expected them to do, and then figure out which one of these players' big contracts to trade next summer. But or maybe make that decision closer to the trade deadline if the season's not going the way you want. But what they obviously saw from this offer from the Knicks, who might have been more motivated to seek out help on the center market when Mitchell Robinson got hurt. Maybe they were ready to not go in. Maybe they're like, hey, Mitchell Robinson's good. We're fine. We'll just deal with this. But then Mitchell Robinson got hurt, and they didn't really have any centers on the roster. They were going to have to play Precious Achiuwa, Julius Randle, and OG Anunoby at the 5. And I just don't think that they wanted to do that. And so maybe they started calling around the league, and they ended up calling Minnesota about whoever. And then they say, you know what? Well, are you ready to make a move on Karl-Anthony Towns? And they were all able to offer Minnesota significant potential cap relief if Julius Randle opts out. And by the way, I don't think Julius Randle is long for Minnesota anyway. He doesn't really fit on that roster. Like they could trade him and the cap relief he could provide another team before February's trade deadline and get some more assets out of it. But Dante DiVincenzo helped them a lot as like sort of that middle, like what's he making, like $12 million?
Yeah.
It's a nice chunky salary, but it's not an expensive one. And he solves a lot of their backcourt depth issues. The Heat, did not have, they had a player making the same amount as Julius Randle and $29 million in Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero's under contract for 3 years. He doesn't provide any cap relief. And they didn't have that $10 million chunky contract to pair with Tyler Hero to get up to that Karl-Anthony Towns money and then basically swap the expiring $29 million contract out and basically save $30 million after getting off of Cat's deal. Like, they just didn't have the contracts, right? Like, the Heat have $20+ million guys, Duncan Robinson, Terry Rozier, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler. They have all these guys making $20, $30, $40 million. And then, like, their next guy is making $5, $6, $7 million. They don't have a lot of these chunky contracts that you can move, and they don't have anything in the form of cap relief that can entice a team like Minnesota, who's only trading Cat for cap relief. So I understand Heat fans looking at this and be like, oh my God, we couldn't match Julius Randle, because the Heat have plenty of players better than Julius Randle. But like, we couldn't match Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo in a protected first to go get Cat, who have been such a great fit on this roster. And the answer is,
did you say they have plenty
no,
of players that are better than Julius Randle?
The Heat?
Did you just say that? Yeah. Better than Julius Randle?
Sure. 2.
Who?
Bam and Jimmy.
Okay.
Is that not plenty? Did I use plenty wrong?
No.
A couple.
A couple too. Yeah, I'm more looking forward to seeing how Miami responds, if at all. It's like we talked about this as we were sitting there in media day yesterday. Does Miami feel the need to make a move? And I think based on the comments that we saw yesterday, and I know that one of the quotes that's going around quite a bit is Eric Spoelstra responding to Ira Winterman and saying, you sound scared, right? Because Ira was asking.
Like, Ira didn't back down on that. He was like, what did he say? Not scared. What did he say? I'm cautious. I'm just weird.
Right. Well, it was a line of questioning that he was asking a lot of the players at the podium. I don't know if he was doing it in the scrum because we were busy doing our own interviews, but
he was.
With all the improvements around the East, how does the Miami Heat feel about it? And I think the consensus was we'll figure it out later, but right now we just got to have to, again, play the games between the lines, et cetera. So they're not overly concerned. For anybody who thinks, geez, Miami's taking a step back as everybody's taking a step forward, I don't think the Heat see it that way. I think the Heat roster is set for this start of the season. I don't think they're.
I think you're right. I think another part of this too is that they have their own stuff to figure out. Like, they stunk last year. They weren't good. Like, they have a lot of their own internal things to figure out before they can even worry about the competition in the East. Like, the Knicks felt good about where they came off of last year. It was just a second round playoff appearance, but like, they felt good about Jalen Brunson and where they are in the organization. They added Mikal Bridges and Cat to that, and they feel good about where they're at. Celtics, they won the championship. They kept all their guys. They feel good about that. Like, Indiana feels good about what they did. Philadelphia was building on something. They had Paul George. Like, they had things to feel good about. The emergence of Tyrese Maxey for the 76ers last year. Like, they had things internally that they had to figure out, but they had things to feel good about too that they could build on. I don't think that there was anything that happened last year that the Heat could feel good about. Last year was just a big heaping slice of humble pie for the Miami Heat, and I think that reality has set in. And so before you can worry about what you got to do in the East, and I agree with them on this, is we got to figure out our own stuff first. And then maybe between now and the trade deadline, we can make some additions after we just figure out what we are. But we don't even know what we are yet, so we don't even really know what to add. But the point you made about, hey, like, we've got 4 of the 5 starters pretty much named. The one that we haven't named is the power forward, and then the Heat were linked to Julius Randle. That part is intriguing. So if the Heat were going to respond in some way, either between now and the trade deadline, maybe that's sort of the position that you should look at.
Yeah, unless somebody like Nico, I think specifically pops, and I think that's the highest
great point
ceiling amongst the players that are currently on the roster. Like, I think Jaquez is certainly going to have a role. Who knows what he was able to contribute? But I think in terms of the best fit, I still think it's Nico. I think a lot of our listeners agree too, because based on what we talked about in yesterday's episode and the comments, some of the comments that we got back, I think a lot of people see Nico probably emerging as a starter at the beginning of the preseason, and we'll see how it plays out. Because I think he's the better fit right now, and he's got a lot to prove, and I think he's ready for that challenge too. So it's a good opportunity for him to continue to build off what we saw from him last season.
The other part of this, and just to kind of drive this point home, I suppose, before we finish up here, it's going to be very hard for the Heat to make any of these kinds of moves. right? Like we have seen them call about Mikal Bridges. We know they called about Lauri Markkanen. They apparently were involved in some way, shape, or form, or tried to get involved in some way, shape, or form in this Julius Randle cat swap.
Yeah.
They tried to get in on DeMar DeRozan, which is obviously a little bit different because he was a free agent. It would have been a sign and trade and all these things, but they have tried. They just simply don't have the cap flexibility or the assets to really move the needle here. And so I don't mean that as a way to make you feel better about them not getting involved in cat. It's kind of a way to make you feel worse about where they're at, because once that next player comes open, I don't know that or available. I don't know that I don't know that the Heat are going to have the assets to sort of make that move.
It's that salary disparity, like you pointed it out, and it's I've never considered it before, but it is the reality. It's like you've got 4 players making a lot of money, and then everybody else not making as much, and you don't have those kind of chunky salaries, to put it. Like I remember even like one of the first points that Pat made in 2017, like when he re-signed James Johnson and Dion Waiters and Kelly Olynyk to these deals that were somewhere in the same range. Like I think they all got very similar 12 million deals. Yeah, like 4 year, $12 million per year. And it's like these kind of deals where, you know what? They're all movable. They're all tradable assets. And that was the idea. You don't have those on the roster currently. So you've got this, weird disparity where you have a lot of money at the top and then very little money at the bottom. And those players, they have more value because of those low contracts too. So you can't, like a guy like Jaime, who's making on a rookie deal, like that's a high value player. You wouldn't want to trade him for anything but an all NBA level player, I think. So
and they don't have the expiring contracts either, right? Like even like last year, you had the expiring Kyle Lowry contract at almost $30 million.
It's why they made the move they did.
Right, and then you swapped him for Terry Rozier, who's not even close to expiring. Like, it's they're in a tough spot, and I think that's been highlighted here by the lack of moves they've made this summer. That said, a lot of good things that we came away with from Media Day. I'm excited about the start of the season. I think we've pretty much end every show saying that, but
no, it's true, and great conversations too. Like I know it's just. I know I want everybody to kind of listen to it, but I mean, just seeing the feedback that we're getting today, like Duncan, great. Nasir Little, really open about everything. His choice of pub sub, but just he was really fun to talk to. And we were told about it by somebody in Portland who obviously covered him with the Blazers, and he did not disappoint. But even Josh Christopher too, like a guy who's kind of been quiet throughout his career. You don't really hear much about it. He really popped. I saw somebody say he's really charming, and I could see that. Like he had a lot of personality.
People really enjoyed that one. People really enjoyed the Josh Christopher one, and
Nico,
his stories
Nico
about
too,
swapping text messages and playlists with Pat Riley. Like everybody go listen to that stuff. We'll have more episodes for you throughout the week. We'll be breaking down all the news out of Heat training camp in the Bahamas and all that kind of stuff. But for now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.